Any Navajos in here? It's an Indian country. You could say you could throw a stone and you'll probably hit a Navajo anywhere you go. But Yat she'e Jihan Gearon yenisha, Twitch eating nish le do na kaitla jenabashis chin, last che dash che do na kaitla jenadashanale, tehatoy dan nasha. So I just introduced myself in Navajo, my 4 clans. As was mentioned, I'm Navajo on my mother's side and African American on my father's side, and I grew up on the eastern side of the Navajo Nation in Arizona, a place called Old Sawmill, Arizona. Again, my talk is entitled Navigating Contradictions, a Just Transition for the Navajo Nation. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the Navajo Nation. And then where do I point this and how does it work? Point it, okay. And then press the button or? Okay, haha, thank you. Anybody been to the Navajo Nation? All right, okay. So there it is on a map of the United States. The Navajo Nation is bigger than the state of West Virginia. It's in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, and is home to 110 different communities. Our median income on the Navajo Nation is $7,500 a year. There's about half of our population that lives on the reservation and half of our population that lives off. So 200,000 or so on, 200 or 1,000 so off, mostly in the major cities of the Southwest and border towns like Phoenix, Albuquerque, Flagstaff, that's where I live, Gallup, New Mexico, Page. We always hover between an unemployment rate of 46% and 54%. Recently, it's been up to 70% unemployment. And another interesting fact is that 75% of all unelectrified homes in the entire United States are on our reservation. So it's very common to, when I first grew up and lived with my grandma, to not have electricity or running water on the reservation. Very little infrastructure, lots of dirt roads and all that kind of stuff. It's bad in one way, but it's also really awesome in another way. That's the way I think about it. I appreciate growing up that way. I think a lot of us do too. The Navajo Nation also has a long history of an extractive economy. So I mentioned I was from a place called Old Sawmill because there was an actual sawmill there a while ago, and that was the first resource that was taken off of our reservation in a place called the Cheska Mountains. But there's also a long history of uranium mining and oil and gas development. There's a huge fracking boom going on now on the eastern side, New Mexico side of the reservation, and of course coal mining. And that's what I'm going to focus on now. Okay, so here we are in Arizona. I work for an organization called the Black Mesa Water Coalition, and our work focuses in one region of the reservation called Black Mesa. Traditionally, our territories is surrounded by 4 mountains, 2 in Colorado, 1 in New Mexico, and 1 in Arizona. The San Francisco Peaks and Flagstaff, where I live, is our western boundary. Within those territories, there's also 2 mountain chains. I mean, some people would say they're mountains and some would not. One is Cheska Mountains, which I mentioned, and then the other is Black Mesa. So these represent a wife and husband, female, and the male within our homelands, and so has many associated teachings with those. Black Mesa is the female. Black Mesa is home to 11 to 17 to 21 communities, depending on who you're talking to, and if you're counting Navajo and Hopi communities. The Hopi reservation is right in the middle of the Navajo reservation. And I think you can see it on this map too. So they're also on Black Mesa. Black Mesa is also home to 2 coal mines, the Black Mesa mine and the Kayenta mine, that were started in the early 70s. I'm not going to spend too much time on the Black Mesa mine, but you can see that it used to provide coal to the Mojave Generating Station through a 273-mile-long coal slurry pipeline. So under Black Mesa is also a pristine aquifer called the Navajo Aquifer. And that's really how our organization started, was to protect the water in the Navajo Aquifer, which was being pumped up and used at the rate of 4,400 acre-feet per year to just transport coal 273 miles. We were part of the struggle to shut that down in 2005, and we did. Yay! Okay. Now, the Kayenta mine provides coal by rail to the Navajo Generating Station in Page, New Mexico. The Navajo Generating Station is 2,250 megawatts, making it the largest coal-fired power plant in the entire western United States. It's also the only coal-fired power plant that's owned by our federal government, majority owned by the Bureau of Reclamation. It was created to pump water. See this big canal? It's called the CAP, Central Arizona Project. So it was created to pump water uphill and then down into the valleys of central and southern Arizona. So people who've been to Phoenix and Tucson, Scottsdale, you know that those are smack dab in the middle of the desert, right? So this is how they're actually able to get their water, and the lifestyle that they have down there with swimming pools and golf courses and misters and all of that kind of stuff is because of the cheap electricity and cheap energy that we of the Navajo Nation have provided. Okay, so here are two of our founders. The guy on the left, Roberto, runs our green economy program. We do want to change that name, but they're looking out over the mine. And this is a slide just to show you, I think you can probably guess that there are many detrimental impacts from coal mining and coal-fired power plants. Impacts to the Navajo aquifer, contamination and overuse of water, health impacts, relocation impacts. Probably many of you are somewhat familiar with the issues of Big Mountain and forced relocation of Navajo and Hopi communities to make way for coal mining. Many health problems. In Page, of course, the communities, Navajo communities that live around that power plant as well are also experiencing a lot of health impacts, developmental problems, respiratory problems. And there's also social impacts beyond that. So I told you that Black Mesa was a female mountain in our cultural teachings, and I guess spirituality, for lack of a better word. So what does it mean when you dig and take and beat up and mess up that female? You know, what does that say about our culture? We say that the land and our homelands reflect how healthy our people are. And it's unhealthy right now, to say the least. And I was asked to speak on this panel because I often say this one statement, which is that this kind of fossil fuel development, of course, was intentional. It was pushed on us through various means, but the impact has been that it's made us, as Navajo people, economically dependent on our own cultural destruction. That's the situation that we're in. And how do we get out of that situation? With 70% unemployment, you know, this coal mine, this coal-fired power plant provides 1,000 jobs, which doesn't seem that much at all, but when there are no jobs available, it means a lot. So how do we break ourselves out of this bind that we're in? That's the challenge that we're faced with. These are our goals. They're kind of long, so I won't read them all. But the main point of these is that there's an emphasis, that our emphasis is on healing, that decolonization and healing is an important part of our work. Healing as individuals and as communities and as our culture. And also we uphold our traditions within our organizations and a focus on replenishing those. And then the last is how can we transition our economy to actually reflect those things. We have a few projects that we work on. We're calling them pilot projects at this point. And we use the term just transition. Do you guys understand what that means? Or, okay. So I don't have an easy definition for you either. But I think the point is just, yes, and transition in meaning it's gonna take time. So we know the situation that we're in right now. We know that it's bad, and we know where we wanna go, yes? Our future of language revitalization, cultural revitalization, useful work, you know, healthy communities, healthy lands, healthy water. Just transition means how do we get from A to B? How do we actually make that happen? And especially in the absence of, some giant catastrophe or zombie apocalypse, that might put everyone back to square zero, what can we do to actually make that transition possible and work for us? So we have a couple of things. First is the Navajo Wool Market Improvement Project. So part of our work is trying to figure out, what do Navajo people already do? So it's not like, oh, what's this new industry we can come in and teach you, but what are you already doing? And what are the cultural values surrounded by those, and how can we build off of that? You probably have heard of Navajo rugs. For those of you who have visited the reservation, maybe you ate mutton. Sheep is a big part of our culture, and we're wool producers, and we eat lots of mutton, and it's part of our family gatherings and everything. So our wool project is, first we did some research about what happens to all the wool that people produce. And we found out that they're sold in border towns, like Gallup. Then there's like a giant auction in Roswell, New Mexico, where it's sold to a lot of companies in Texas, and then they go on to make products. And so our idea is, how can we actually cut out all these middlemen and actually have the producers of these products be the ones who are getting paid for it, right? I mean, that's a problem of capitalism, is the people who actually do the work and produce our resources are not paid for them. Some other person way up here in an office is. So we do trainings. You can see at the top left. We've brought in and made connections with actual wool buyers to just come and teach us, what are ways to shear your sheep, what are ways to breed your animals, what are ways to separate your wool, what are ways to clean your wool in order to get you a higher price. And where most people were getting maybe 25 cents a pound for their wool, we've gotten it in some cases up to $1.25 a pound for community members. And last year was our third year hosting a wool buy. So our first year we did one in Pinon, Arizona, and then last year we did it in 8 different communities. And you can see, in this bottom right corner, like how much wool, Navajo people produce. We filled up like 4 of these giant trucks or something like that. So, that capacity is there, and I think what we've tried to do is prove that it is viable for people who carry on this traditional way of lifestyle to also be able to supplement their income with it as well. And then the question becomes, what other infrastructure can we build on the Navajo Nation to support this kind of industry? There's a community called Hard Rock in Black Mesa who actually did a feasibility study on whether they can create a wool washing facility. And it was deemed unfeasible because there are not enough water resources. Yet now, 15 miles away from that community is the mine, and they use as much water as they want for free. So not only is this a way to get people money, but it's a way to actually challenge our economy and the use of the very precious resources that we have in that region. Next. So those were the results from the wool buy in the past few years. So I think the first year we sold maybe 15,000 pounds, and last year was like 60,000 pounds. And so just like with basic organizing, not to say that it's not a lot of hard work, but just with basic organizing, we actually have made a big difference. To the point where we now have companies from Texas being like, where's all the Navajo wool? Can we come to your wool buys? And it's like, well, only if you're willing to pay, this higher price to community members for it. So even with just a little bit of effort, we've made things a lot better and proven it viable. Okay, our other project is the Food Sovereignty Project. The Food Sovereignty Project is basically what many of the panelists talked about on the previous panel, is how do we revitalize our food systems. We have the same health impacts that many communities have, especially with the impacts of colonization, the forced use of commodity foods that we weren't able to herd and wander as we used to be. We were confined to a reservation, etc. So this project is really about trying to find out how can we improve our food systems, not to sell necessarily to other places, but to provide for ourselves, to provide for the schools, to provide for the communities, to provide for the senior centers, and to rebuild the community and the clanship systems that used to have cultural roles in producing food for everybody. I'm already running out of time, so I'm going to speed through this next bit. So these are kind of, I would say, our long-term vision of how our traditional economy could be supported again. And I think the end goal is not an economy where we provide things that we then sell to outside communities, but to support ourselves. The Black Mesa Solar Project, I think, is a good example of that, my title, Navigating Contradictions. And the idea here is that our job basically as a Navajo Nation at this point is to be a battery for major southwestern cities, Phoenix, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, etc. Is there a way that we can better provide that energy? Can we use the reclaimed mining lands that have already gone through mining, can't be used for anything else for a large-scale solar project? The difference is that we would be owners of it. We don't own the Navajo generating station. We don't own any of that. We don't make any money back from the energy that we actually provide. But if we did actually own a project like this that could come back into our community and then be reinvested into other types of economic development, a couple that I just shared with you. So that's the general idea of that project. And I'm going to end there. This is my information up here. And I just wanted to make a plug for myself that I have a workshop tomorrow too, where I want to talk about partnerships. We have a lot of people who are interested in these kind of projects, but also to talk about what kind of partnerships might be most useful. So thank you for your time.